Solving quadratics by factoring. In this lesson we're going to continue to solve quadratic equations, but we're going to do this time by factoring, because not all quadratics can be solved by taking the square root or by completing the square. Right, so first we have a couple things we have to know. The first one is about solutions. The solutions to a quadratic equation are the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 are called roots. So this is just another name. Remember, solution was a 0, the same thing as a 0. 0 was the same thing as an x-intercept. And now we're saying the solution is also a root, okay? And that's when I have it set already equal to 0, called roots. The roots of an equation are the values of the variable that make the equation true. They don't make y equals ax squared plus bx plus c true. They make ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 true. And that 0 just basically takes the place of your y. So with that said, if you look down at the bottom, all of these things mean the same. Root, solution, 0, and x-intercept. They all tell us the same thing about our function. Alright? Now the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to introduce you to a property that you're going to need, that we're going to use to solve these quadratics by factoring. This property is called the zero product property. And what it says is that if I have two things multiplied together, a times b, and those equal 0, so the product is going to be 0. We all know that if we multiply two things together and they're equal to 0, one of them has to, at least one of them has to be 0. So what we'll say is then a equals 0 and or b equals 0. One of the two has to equal 0. They can both equal 0, but at least one of them has to equal 0. Okay? Alright, the next thing is a little bit more information. This is actually how we're going to solve the quadratics by factoring. We're going to use that zero product property. Okay? So to find the roots of a quadratic function, we're going to factor the polynomial first. Just the ax squared plus bx plus c side. It's in this form. And it's supposed to be an a. We're going to factor this first. Okay? Then after that, we're going to use the zero product property to set each factor equal to 0. And then we're going to solve each equation. Those answers that we get are going to be our roots. They're going to be x equals something and x equals something if there's two of them. They're going to be our roots. Okay, so let's jump into a problem and see if we can do this, if we can follow along this process. Okay, so here's our example. Factor to find the roots of y equals x squared plus 2x minus 24. So we're going to factor this polynomial. Okay, so if you remember, when we factor, here's what we do. We make a box, the old box method. And if you remember, we're going to put this first term in the top left box, the last term, the c part, in our bottom right hand box. And then we're going to find things that multiply and add together to make 2, or that add together to make 2x, and those go in these two boxes. And they have to multiply to be the negative 24x squared, if you'll remember that. So I got to multiply to be negative 24x squared, and I have to add to be 2x. So when I start working with that, I know that since it's negative, one has to be positive and one has to be negative. So I'm going to work through, and basically here's what I find. That if I take negative 4x and multiply that by 6x, that gives me negative 24x squared. And if I add those two things together, it will equal positive 2x. So these are my two factors that go in these boxes. If you have questions on the factoring, you need to visit with your teacher, or you can go back and review some of the videos we did on factoring back in the third 6 weeks. Alright, now I'm going to factor each of these rows and columns, if you'll remember that. I'm going to factor this first column. It's just going to be an x. The second column is going to be a 4. It's going to be minus because of that minus there. My other factor is going to be an x here because they each have an x in common. And here I need a 6. Alright, now I'm going to double check, and since this 6 is positive, I'm going to make it plus 6. I'm going to double check. I'm going to go x times x gives me x squared. X times negative 4 gives me negative 4x. 6 times x gives me 6x. And 6 times negative 4 gives me negative 24. So I've got my two factors now. X plus 6 and x minus 4. And I'm going to make that equal to 0. This part, the x plus 6 times x minus 4, all that is, it's the same thing as this, just factored. They have the same values. And now I'm going to use the zero product property that says if the two factors multiplied together have to equal 0, then one or both of the factors have to equal 0. So I'll do x plus 6 equals 0 and x minus 4 equals 0. And now I'll just solve those, and I get x equals negative 6 and x equals 4. And those are my two solutions. I can check them by plugging them back in to the original equation, and if I do that, they'll both work out to be 0, which is what I'm wanting to get. Alright? So that's the process for solving quadratics by factoring. Okay, here's another problem for you. It's my hidden question, and I want you to try to work this one on your own. You're going to put the answers to this in the WISC and submit it for grading, okay? Do your very best on it. If you need to go back and get some help on this again, just rewind, rewatch the video. If you have questions again on the factoring, make sure that you go back to some of the old videos we had, the old lessons in Unit 3, and get some help on that factoring, okay? Don't forget to complete the WISC and submit it, and we'll see you in class to work on these problems.